is India's economy in bigger trouble than we think? Today, a report in the newspaper Live Mint said that a key database that was introduced in India's new GDP series has been found to be full of holes. A study conducted by the National Sample Survey Office, or the NSSO, in 12 months ending the June of 2017 was released last week. And it found that as much as 36% of companies that are part of the database of companies which are used to calculate India's GDP cannot be traced or were wrongly classified. And this in turn has then raised serious questions about the way in which the GDP is calculated and the Central Statistics Office, which has been a very respected institution for a long time, but questions are now being raised about just how reliable India's statistics are. If you look not just at the GDP numbers, but also at other sectors and what is happening there, tax collections, for instance, we are told may have fallen short. There are reports that direct taxes have fallen short by 62,000 crores in the year 2018-2019. Another key indicator has been the auto sector, which has enjoyed pretty good growth over the last several years. It was 14% in 2017-2018, but this year it is down to just 5%. The Congress, Mr. Chidambaram, the former finance minister, held a press conference on this issue earlier today. This is what he said.
The MCA 21 data, which has so far not been made public or shared with any researchers or economists, is full of falsehoods. 35% of the companies in the MCA data do not exist or cannot be traced. That's the kind of bluff and bluster which the government has used to present a rosy picture of the economy. But now all that is falling apart.
Well, lots to talk about as far as the economy is concerned. We have Professor Arun Kumar joining us back on the program this evening, and Pramit Bhattacharya, the data editor for Mint, is with us, and he did that story today. We'll also be joined by economist Madan Sabnavis in just a little while. Pramit Bhattacharya, to you first. If you could very simply explain to people why this report is actually alarming and how GDP is calculated. If 36% of these companies have either been wrongly classified or can't be traced, what kind of a difference in GDP numbers could we be looking at, or do we just not know?
Right. So this database, when it was first introduced, right at that time it was controversial. One of the committee members who should have been consulted was not consulted. And if you look at his report at that time, it showed almost a doubling of the manufacturing GDP, because the numbers were blown up using companies that had not reported that year, but had reported in earlier years. So far we were told that, look, they may not report in 1 year because of various reasons, but these companies actually exist, and hence if you are blowing this up, there is no issue. But now NSSO surveyors have gone on the field to actually verify whether these companies are there, whether they maintain accounts, whether the data could be collected. Out of the companies, more than almost 63,420 companies that were there, they could only capture data for 54%. So 45%, wow. More than 45% are not part of the survey. And there were 2 survey reports that were planned on it, because the assumption was these companies exist and we'll get data from on the service sector which didn't exist earlier. And there were 2 NSS reports planned. They had to be junked by the National Statistical Commission, and instead we have this short technical report.
So what does it do, Professor Arun Kumar, to India's credibility? There have been some questions raised about the GDP data in the recent past, the way it was released by the Niti Aayog, that was also not conventional. So when something like this comes out, what does the world think of us?
Well, obviously credibility suffers because of the 4th controversy on GDP that we've had. First was the change of the base year, 2011-12, and what's happening to our series earlier, whether the NDA was doing better or the UPA was doing better, all these controversies started coming up, And then when one of the subcommittees of the National Statistical Commission came up with a back series which showed that the UPA time was better performance than during the NDA, then the government said this is only temporary, we don't accept it, etc., etc. Then they said a new series in which they showed NDA was doing better, but that was questioned by everybody because that methodology was not very clear. So this is the 4th controversy that we've had. So obviously what it suggests is that our credibility will suffer, and the reason is very simple, because now we are going back on several databases. For instance, employment, now the government is saying we don't have good data. And if we don't have good data on employment, then we will not have good data on the unorganized sector. If we don't have good data on the unorganized sector, then the GDP figures are again in question. So this is the second way in which the GDP data will be questioned again and again. And that's why the rate of growth, whether it's 7% or as I keep saying, it's 1% if you include the unorganized sector, that becomes a big controversy for us to this thing. So what is the real rate of growth? Nobody really knows.
We have Geeta Bhatt. She's a political analyst and a sympathizer of the BJP also joining us on the program. And Ms. Bhatt, I just wanted to read out to you some points that Ratin Roy made on NDTV just a little while ago with my colleague Srinivasan Jain. And Ratin Roy, of course, is an advisor in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Among other things, he has said that India is heading for a structural slowdown. The current numbers are an early warning. That India is heading for a middle income trap. We will not be like China or South Korea. We will be like Brazil or South Africa. We will see large scale poverty, rising crimes. And that he's also said you can't blame any one political party for it, but that India will grow at 5 to 6%, but a time will come when it stops. These are pretty strong words from someone who's part of the Prime Minister's own advisory council, Geeta Bhatt, and therefore have we underestimated how badly things are in the economy right now?
Well, Nidhi, I am not an expert of economy. It is an echo, if you can please correct it. But one thing that I do understand is that, maybe after 30th of May, when certain kind of analysis about the economy of the country will be done, I think it will be done, with less biases. That is my first point. Secondly, because what I understand, this story I have not read, which is there on live, the Mint, but you see, what I can understand is there is a certain data release which has taken place from NSSO. Now, I just want to put forth one small example that when this whole, controversy regarding employment had come up, where the NSSO data has been taken, I can see Mr. Gaurav Vallabh smiling a lot, but I hope he will not interrupt me and let me complete. At that time, there has been said that, in 45 years, so much of unemployment has not taken place. This echo has not been corrected, please. Now, but no one talked about that the basic fundamental parameter over which the calculation was done by NSSO has been changed. Rather than from, the basic consumption, average family consumption, it was changed to educational attainment. And in this regard, there was neither any, neither any feedback or consultation was taken from anywhere else. Therefore, if you look at the NSSO data in terms of the population of the country, you will see that there is a decrease in it.
Actually, your statement is being questioned on fact. Your statement is being questioned on fact by Pramit Bhattacharya of the Mint. He just wants to come in.
Through the NSC annual reports, which are in public domain, the entire methodology, sampling frame, stratification strategy, the shift from consumption to expenditure, they have all been discussed. Even the Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant has signed on those reports. So there is nothing cloak and dagger there. They are all public documents.
Well, Gaurav Vallabh, you wanted to come in.
This confirms.
Yes, but there is a change. Do you contradict it? There is no change in which the
there is change. There is change.
There is
change, and the person Amitav Kundu.
Right. So you accept that.
There is a change. Now, the person Amitav Kundu, on whose recommendations this report was made, he said that despite this change, they are comparable. They are not exactly comparable, but they are broadly comparable. And he doesn't expect that had it been conducted in any other way, the unemployment rate would have come down.
Information, verified data comes out, when the full report comes out, I think then only we will be in a position actually to contradict it.
So it should come out. The government should release the raw data and the report. That's what we are all demanding.
The problem is that the data has not been released.
Yes, that should come out.
Based on one simple report, we cannot just dislodge that the economy is.
Madam Bhatt, please allow me.
I have not been allowed to complete.
Okay, let her complete. That's a fair point. Go ahead, please. So you're saying that you believe after there is a new government in power, there will be less biases, quote unquote, from which people will analyze. But these are not biases. This is just data that people are looking at. These are numbers.
It will be more impartial. I personally feel more impartial. Everyone, from whether it is from the ruling class or from the opposition parties or those who are supporting them, economists, it will be much more rational and unbiased. That is what is my first take. Second is that trying to portray that, that it's such a sorry picture of the economy of the, in the coming decade, considering that, what the World Bank has been saying, what the IMF has been saying about the Indian economy that, we are going to, in another 20 years, we will be, the topmost economy in the world. I mean, this is a very pessimistic view which has been put forward with exactly how this analysis has been done, that I'm sure other people will be able to.
Okay, let me ask Gaurav about that. Are you all just being pessimistic?
As far as the records which are available,
no, ma'am.
Ma'am,
it
I
does
just
not
have to
seem
get
so.
everyone else in. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
ma'am, nothing about pessimism or optimism.
Sure.
The issue is that 37% of the companies which were used for this GDP data, they are shell companies. They are not existing. They are only on papers. So that confirms our nara that sabka saath 15 ka vikas. These shell companies are one of those people. Chota Modi, Majla Modi, Piyush Goyal, all these shell companies belongs to these group of people. So these shell companies ka vikas ho gaya, pehli baat. Second thing, there was a report that I am not saying that. Forget about cars, houses. People are not having money to buy hair oils. People are not having money to buy shampoo. This is the report.
Okay.
People are not having money to buy shampoo, and that is not. I am not saying this. This is Hindustan Unilever CEO is saying that this is the state of economy of our country, and they are saying 7%, 8%. 108 economists combined together and said that this is the worst form of data we are getting from India. But whenever we ask question, they are saying, "Arey, vikas ho raha hai, you are not able to see." अरे किसका विकास कर रहे हो? 15 लोगों का तो हो गया, वो तो बैठ गया लंदन में, 10-10 लाख का सूट भी पहन लिया, पर विकास किसका हो रहा है यहाँ पे? When we are saying 45 years highest unemployment level, then they are saying we don't agree because GDP is growing and you can't have that unemployment rate of 7% with 7% GDP growth. Now the data is come, your actual face is out that you had misled the country. The growth, GDP growth was either 0% or in negative if you will include the informal sector into your calculation. If you will include the
I will
real
ask
companies
Professor
into
Arun
your
Kumar about that
calculation.
because he's done the most work
What
on the
about
informal
the
sector.
2 lakh shell companies, which were existing?
Ma'am, the problem
and,
is that
they
in
have
those
been
2 lakh companies,
announced,
Majla Modi's companies
then
was not there.
you are
Chota
not-
Modi's
you
companies
don't
were
want to
not
talk
there.
about
You
the
were
2
cherry
lakh
picking
shell
the shell companies to
What
wind
about
wind
and
it
it's
up.
kind of a
One second.
policy decision which the
I
Congress
want to-
party
I
had
want to
taken
ask Mr.
with
Madan
the
Sabnawis,
insolvency
he's
and
an
bankruptcy
economist.
code.
One
with the
second, can
Benami
I
Act
just ask
coming,
Mr.
there have
Sabnawis
been,
for a quick
lot
comment
of-
on this? Mr. Sabnawis, how much does this report firstly damage India's credibility? And if this is correct, then what does it mean for the GDP numbers? What is our GDP?
No, actually, the issue which you raised about these 5 lakh companies which were used for calculating the GDP, especially for the industrial sector as well as certain services, I think we were quite skeptical about it from the beginning, because if we look at any standard database on corporate performance, we don't get more than 20,000-30,000 companies. So when we were told that the MCA was looking at 5 lakh companies rather than 2,500 companies, which was used earlier by the RBI, there was some bit of skepticism. But still, I would give the benefit of doubt that if there is 36% of these companies have disappeared, I don't think materially it made much of a difference in terms of GDP growth. But also, I would take the view that while GDP growth is definitely not something to be satisfied with, but a number of 7% is still fairly satisfying, and I think it's fairly stable. There's a bit of stagnation, so I think what Mr. Rathan Roy had spoken of is also true, that we definitely need to get the economy back on the wheels. Otherwise, in future, if we're not able to generate a kind of jobs which is required to go with a 7% growth, there could be certain kind of social implications also.
Well, Professor Arun Kumar, just on that point of what Madan Sabnawis says, he doesn't believe that this would materially change the actual GDP growth. But you've argued for the longest time that you believe the actual GDP growth is far, far less because the informal sector is in deep trouble.
That's right. So, there are 2 points. One is that when the government and the proponents say that the World Bank and the IMF are supporting the rate of growth of 7%, they're not independent data collecting agencies. They only take the government data and they reinforce that data. So, therefore, to say that they are saying it and therefore it's 7%, that's not correct. Second point is that the data for the unorganized sector comes once in 5 years in what's called the reference year. And then in between, it's assumed that the rate of growth of the organized sector and the unorganized sector is the same, or it's assumed that the productivity is the same and therefore we can multiply the employment. Both these change because of the 2 shocks, the demonetization which affected the unorganized sector, and that's why the Manrega demand has shot up. You know, Manrega demand, which used to be about 37,000 crores, now up to 66,000 crores. That means people 2 years later haven't come back to the urban areas. The credit offtake, the investment, all of those are down, which are pointing to the fact that the unorganized sector is still hurting. And therefore, if you look at the private data that has come on the unorganized sector, the CMI data on the decline in the workforce and various other things, then you realize that the unorganized sector is declining by roughly about 10%. If you read the statement of the pressure cooker industry's chairman who says we are growing at 24% because the unorganized sector is declining. You see the Agra shoe manufacturers industry where the unorganized sector is hurting, the organized sector is doing well.
Look at the auto numbers.
So auto numbers, but auto is not something that the unorganized sector consumes. But there's a second round effect that if the unorganized sector is hurt, the organized sector also starts getting hurt.
Tax collection is down.
And the demand is
air
down.
Travel is down. So, consumer goods sales are down.
So therefore, all that points to the fact that the unorganized sector is declining unambiguously. And that's why if you include that, the rate of growth becomes 1%. It doesn't remain 7%. 7% could be the rate of growth of the organized sector. But now these GDP numbers put doubt on that also. Because if this is a way in which you inflate the figures for the missing companies and the missing companies are shell companies, then it's false.
But let me ask Nalini a quick comment on how this plays out politically, because when people are going out to vote, is this what is primarily weighing on the minds of people, or is it, as the BJP would like to believe, that, and it could be, that it's all about Mr. Modi and that trumps everything else?
I think it is all about Mr. Modi. I think Mr. Modi is actually standing from 543 constituencies on behalf of the NDA. I really believe so. But I would say that when Madam Bhatt talks about bias in data, actually there is no bias in raw data. There can be bias in data collection or data analysis, but that is very transparent. If you're assigning wrong coefficients or wrong weights, you will immediately see the bias. But I'm going to say something which could be controversial. When we are talking about tax collection, please, now I think we should face the reality. Is it true that in order to shore up the tax collections at the end of March, you have public sector units that are told to give money to the coffers to pay more for a while? Well, actually, I believe that once they pay, the money never goes back to them. But that is how the tax collection figures might be being shored up, which I think is another amazing fact. Is that where is this what the revenue figures should be?
What the issue seems to be, Geeta Bhatt, is the credibility of our numbers and of our data at the end of the day. Are you suggesting today that the NSSO is no longer an institution that we can rely on? I mean, last year when there was this whole controversy about the jobs numbers, senior ministers in the government of India were saying, no, let's wait for the NSSO report, wait and see what it says. Then when it was leaked, it was, it was not even disowned. It was said that this is a draft report and we will come out with the final report, which we are still waiting for. So are we now going to sort of raise question marks on the NSSO itself, which has been stellar in how it has collected data for decades now?
See, if the sampling, if the way you are you do the sampling of the data, if those parameters are going to be changed, then definitely we are going to get different results. So that I gave one example. As per the NSSO data, the population is actually decreasing if you look at the data, and it also shows that in employment, those who are in the service industry or those who have an educational background, there is an increase of salary which has been shown by this NSSO data. So it is for unorganized sector, it is showing. Why? Because the sampling method, when education comes in between, when you take that into consideration, those who are the daily wage, those who are taking daily wages, they won't be able to be counted in that data. First point. Second point is that there is also a legacy which was inherited by the present government, of which one example that I would like to give here, and that is of the oil bonds which the previous government had purchased from the Iran government. And they boasted a lot, the Congress party boasted a lot that the petrol prices did not increase. I just want to please,
madam,
please allow me. Actually taken
if we are not accurately, if we are misrepresenting our GDP numbers, if we are misrepresenting our GDP numbers, that has nothing to do with the previous government getting oil bonds.
Overcome that.
It's about our credibility as a big economy.
We're talking about it. This is important.
Okay, I just have time for a quick last comment, ma'am. Quick last comment to both of you.
Shell companies and about 2-3 lakh ka suit.
State Bank
so
of
they should
India,
be reminded
PSD
that
Chamber
the
of
legacy
Commerce,
that they had
in their
left.
Okay, ma'am, one second.
Please,
had to be paid
Madam
back.
Bhatt,
Out of
please
which
allow
the
others to
30,000
speak.
crore was just
Madam
the
Bhatt,
interest on
please
the
allow
loan.
Okay,
others to
I
speak.
really literally have 30 seconds.
Please.
Yeah.
Let's forget everything. State Bank of India, PSD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in their reports are saying that post demonetization and Gabbar Singh tax, there is a 70% dip in the operating profit. 35% people got retrenched. If we will apply the same logic, the GDP growth is in minus. It can't be positive. Because if we assume formal and informal 50-50 also, then the GDP growth can't be positive. It has to be negative.
All right.
You can't befool people like doing all this type of drama.
I think this is something that requires much deeper debate actually. If you look at each sector and how it's doing, what the Finance Ministry's own report says, which does talk about a slowdown as well. But at the end of the day, what really matters is India's credibility with the rest of the world. And these are question marks that are raised once the credibility of our data is questioned. Thank you to all of you for joining us tonight.